Noises from the attic. I moved into the house towards the end of the year when the nights darkened and chilly winds blew from Camden all the way to Wapping. I liked the location, right by the river, close to that famous pub at the Prospect of Whitby that stands on the bank of the River Thames. They say the pub was built in 1520, a haunt of pirates, whores and judges. I worked at a hospital not too far away. I liked the oldie-worldy atmosphere of the Prospect, and I used to drink there even before I moved into the house. Funny how I came across the house by chance. I wish I hadn't now. Julie was my landlady. I met her and her boyfriend James at the Prospect. She worked at the same hospital I did. She pitched the rent ridiculously low, far below the market value. So low I thought maybe she fancied me. But it wasn't that. I wish it was, really. I don't know what to say about the house. Did I like it? It had character. It was interesting. It was historic even, and without doubt, I was lucky to be living there in such a fantastic location at such a low rent. But did I like it? No, not at all. Not for a minute. The house was old. I don't know if it was as old as the Prospect of Whitby, but it was at least 18th century, if not earlier. It, too, looked over the lazy, dirty Thames as the cold brown water flowed endlessly to the sea. Funnily enough, though I didn't like the house, I enjoyed standing in the small backyard, looking out onto the misty Thames on those cold, slow days of winter. To cap the place's charms, we weren't far from Execution Dock, where they chained pirates at low water and left them to drown as the tide came in. I thought one time maybe the entire thing about the house was something to do with that, but it wasn't. The house belonged to Julie's father. She told me it had been in the family for generations, but her dad lived elsewhere, out in the leafy suburbs with his new young wife. Maybe he didn't like the house either. But the place was handy for me, and the rent was very reasonable, as I said. My bedroom was on the top floor facing the street, so no river view, though I could of course go into the backyard with a cup of coffee and gaze at boats. There were plenty of other rooms in the house. It was big, but their doors were mostly locked. The ones I could see into were full of clutter, mouldy old books, piles of car magazines from 1972, and her dad's old model railway that no longer worked. Downstairs was the living room with its sofas, its TV, its wooden floor and big Persian rugs. There was a dining room and an old-fashioned kitchen that badly needed a refit. When did it all start? The tapping was the first thing. It began in mid-October. I used to lie in my bed looking at the ceiling, wondering what the hell was making the noise. It was rhythmic, but not always the same rhythm, just a light tapping. Light mostly, but sometimes so loud it would wake me up. And sometimes it went crazy and the rhythm went off, beating like a pumped-up heart about to die. I tried to see if the noise coincided with heavy rain, in case it was water dripping, as if maybe the rain was getting into the roof space and tapping down just above my head. Somehow I convinced myself it was. That explanation put my mind at rest for a while. My landlady, Julie, spent her time at her new boyfriend Brian's place. The old boyfriend, James, had been a journalist. I sort of got on with him. Brian was a big rugby-playing jock type. He was okay with me, but we had little to talk about. He had no interest in cardiology, and I very little in rugby. But Julie appeared infatuated with him. She would stand there with her arms draped around him as he talked about whatever pointless shit was on his very tiny mind, and she smiled and looked up in awe. I said to her one morning, "What the hell's that dripping that I hear from the attic?" I swear she went white. "Dripping," she said. I couldn't get over her body language. She looked really freaked out. It was an everyday question for her to look so spooked about. I said, "Yeah, the tapping noise. It's like water's got in. You want to get someone up there to check out the roof?" "There is no attic," she said in a definite tone of voice. "In an enormous house as old as this, no attic?" It seemed strange, but I couldn't believe it was something anybody would lie about. She shook her head. "No attic, nothing like that. But maybe there is rain getting in somewhere. I'll ask my dad to get it checked out." She frowned. "Does it bother you?" "Well, not mostly. Sometimes it's loud. It comes and goes, you know. I'll ask Dad to get it seen to, don't worry." I shrugged. I'm not worried. It's your house. Then she changed the subject and asked me how work was. The noise went away for about a week, so I had some refreshing baby sleep. Work was busy. There were spending cuts and we lost some staff. The rest of us just had to fill in. So when I went home after my shifts on the ward, I slept deeply. One night, midweek, I woke and knew something was wrong. It was about 2 a.m. and a loud scraping noise, exactly like something being dragged across floorboards, came from the space above my room. That sure as hell wasn't rain. I lay there with my heart racing. There was silence for about 5 minutes. I kidded myself that maybe I'd dreamt it, and I rolled over to try and sleep when I heard the scratching again. Then I tried to convince myself that maybe birds had got in under the roof. That would account for the scratching, but not that awful dragging noise. The scratching came again the next night. It alternated with the tapping noise. It happened the night after that too. It unnerved me. And I took to staying at friends' houses instead of coming home to sleep. To tell the truth, more than once I deliberately drank myself into oblivion so I could stay somewhere far away from that house in Wapping. I thought about moving out, finding somewhere more conducive, but the rent was just too good. The location was too good. I told myself the entire thing about the noises was just my imagination, and it was irrational to let it get on top of me like it was. I came back more, slept in my own bedroom, told myself it had all been because of stress. Then one night, Julie and Big Brian were at home. We cracked open the bottle of wine downstairs while we watched some glitzy big-budget talent show on TV. Work had gone well. I was in an excellent mood. I was getting on with Brian. He said, "Why don't we go to the Prospect?" It seemed a wonderful idea. The pub wasn't far away, and so even though it was raining and the winter nights still cold and cloudy, we walked through the narrow streets of Wapping with their tasteful repro-Victorian street lamps to the Prospect of Whitby. Once inside, Brian bought me a drink. "You're not a bad guy for a nurse," he said. "Thanks, I think." He laughed and sank half his pint in one gulp. 2 drinks in, I found my courage. "Hey," I said to Julie, "what's with that scratching?" She pretended she didn't know what I was talking about. I said, "You must have noticed it. You lived in that house all your life." "I was away at school and we mostly lived in Surrey," she protested. "Even so, you must have heard the scratching." "No," she said, clearly wanting to end this conversation. There was something about her tone of voice that made me suspicious. I still couldn't see what motivation she'd have to lie about some seagulls getting in under the roof. The rest of the time in the pub, she avoided my gaze. Brian had finished his beer. "Beer good," he said. "Let's get another." And so we got another, and the conversation moved on. And for nearly a week, things were okay. On that day, Julie was in. I was in my room, she was in hers, studying for an exam she had the next day, part of her continuing professional development. I was reading a science fiction novel. I was light years away on a huge gas giant planet when the scratching came, but much louder. I jumped off my bed and stood in the middle of the room. My heart hammered and my throat tightened. Then the noise came again. This time, I was sure it was an animal, something big, almost man-sized. I flung my door open and half ran down the upstairs corridor to Julie's room. I banged on the door. She opened the door. "What?" She seemed pissed off that I disturbed her. "That," I said. I could still hear it. It was centered above my room. "What?" she said again. "That noise." "I can't hear any noise." I was incredulous. "You're joking, right? That awful scratching sound. What the hell is up there?" "Up where?" "There must be an attic. I told you, the house has no attic." "Come to my room, you can hear it." Reluctantly, she followed me. We stood in my room. Now there was nothing, not a sound, as if it was conspiring with her. She shrugged. "I think you're imagining it." "I'm not," I said. We waited. Still nothing. I felt deflated, foolish. We waited a bit longer. She turned and said, "I need to get back to studying." And then the noise came again. A scrabbling sound, like something with claws. She stopped, but didn't turn to face me. I said, "See, that's not rain. It's something." She still didn't turn round. "Julie," I said, "come on, you can surely hear that." Her silence was annoying me. The scratching came again, a frantic scrabbling, as if something was trying to dig its way through the ceiling into my room. "Say something," I said. "What is that?" A dark suspicion formed in my mind that she knew exactly what it was. I said, "I can't sleep with that noise. What is it? Some kind of secret pet or something?" "I've got to get back to my studying," she said. "But you can't leave me with that noise." "It'll stop soon. It always does." So she did know. She walked out of my room without looking back. I followed her. She went into her room and turned round, the door handle in her hand, ready to close it in my face. I stood there and said, "What's really going on?" She shook her head and said vehemently, "Nothing." She was standing at the door of her room and I looked past her. There was a hatch in the ceiling, like the door to an attic. The next day, Julie was gone early and I missed her at breakfast time. I watched morning TV as I wasn't due in at work until the late shift began at 2 p.m. I didn't go outside, but I stayed downstairs. The bottom of the house seemed okay. It was at the top of the house that I felt uneasy. Then I decided I was going to find out what was really going on in that house. I went upstairs. I knocked on Julie's door just to make sure I hadn't got it wrong, and she was in there asleep. There was no answer. I waited, I knocked again, and then, after 3 minutes of silent hesitation, I pushed the door open. It was a messy girl's room. The bed was unmade. Her pyjamas lay around, the top on the bed, the bottoms on the floor. 2 nursing textbooks also lay on the floor next to a pad filled with notes about blood results. It was all so normal. Then I looked up at that hatch in the ceiling. It had been painted white. It looked fixed. I wondered when it had last been opened. I got her chair from the dressing table and I moved it so I could stand right under the hatch. I got up on it and reached up, prodding with my fingers. The door into the attic didn't give, but as I looked closer, I could see that the edges of the oblong door into that space had odd scratch marks on them, as if something with very long nails had opened it and scratched away the paint. I couldn't budge it. And then, for 2 nights, nothing happened. No scratching. The 3rd night I stayed at a friend's house in Crouch End. The 4th night I went back. Brian was in. We cracked a bottle of wine and watched the football. England versus Macedonia. Macedonia won. "It's only got a population of about 1,000. How can they fucking win?" asked Brian. "Dunno, mate. Let me refresh your glass." Then we watched the IT crowd. I said, "Brian, did Julie ever speak to you about the attic?" He shook his head. "Nope. Is there an attic?" "You've been in a room." He looked at me as if I was stupid. "I'm a boyfriend, so yes." "Have you noticed the door in the ceiling?" He shook his head again. "No, is there one?" I nodded, "Yes." "Oh, you mean that hatch thing?" "Yeah, that." He shrugged. "It's just a hatch. I don't think it opens." "But where's it to?" The attic?" He didn't look bothered. "Have you heard the scratching?" "Sure, thought it was birds." So did I. He sipped his beer. "It's not birds?" "I don't think so." "So, what's scratching?" "I don't know." "Should we go and look?" He laughed. "Look in the attic." "I just want to know what's in there." "You're crazy." "But do you want to look?" Julie would go mental. She doesn't like me in her room if she's not there. Anyway, she's back soon. Should be home about 11. "She won't let us look. I think she's hiding something." The wine had made me a bit too open. He looked at me long and hard, then he said, "Macedonia, eh? Who the fuck would have thought they'd have beat us? It's a fucking disgrace." Julie came home and they started canoodling, so I went to bed. And then, in the depths of the night, I heard it again. The house was quiet. It was long after they'd gone to bed. It must have been about 3 a.m. And I thought whatever it was trying to scrape its way through the floor and come and get me. Then, Brian stopped coming. She never said they'd finished. I just never saw him again. My plan was that I'd wait until Julie was out and I'd go and look into the attic for myself. but I needed equipment. I went to a hardware store and got a flashlight and a crowbar in case I needed to prise the hatch open. Until the time came, I kept all my gear in a sports bag at work. The night I decided to do it, I was on a late shift and I got back about 10:30. I let myself into the house with my key. The downstairs was in darkness. I flicked a light on and began to make my way upstairs. I was scared, but I told myself not to be. What could be in the attic? I thought what I'd find would be some birds. But I was shaking. I told myself if it was birds, they'd be frightened of me, not the other way around. But I didn't think it was birds. I went up the stairs. I could feel my heart banging. I just pulled the chair until it was under the hatch, open it, drag myself up, shine a flashlight round, and that would be that. But I couldn't do it. I hesitated outside the door, and the moment I hesitated, my courage disappeared. I told myself I'd not done it because I didn't need to, but it was really because I feared what was in the attic. I went to bed. I slept. Much later, the scratching woke me. It was the middle of the night, and the room was cold. The scratching kept on. I leaned over to switch on the angle poise lamp by my bed. I clicked the switch, but nothing happened. Tentatively, I got up out of bed. I switched on the room light by the wall. No light. Just an empty click. There must be a power cut. I opened the door, and then I stopped. Above me, the scratching had gone silent, but out in the corridor, I heard a breathing. A ragged breathing. And then I got the strangest idea, as if the thing had come down from the attic and into the house. Something had come from the attic and was now standing there in the corridor. There was no lock on my door. I closed it as quietly as I could, hoping that the thing with its tortured breath wouldn't hear. And I held the door handle, shaking with fear. It had been in the attic. Now it was walking the house. I opened the door half an inch and put my eye to the crack. Through the crack, I saw a face. Something watched me. Its face pressed against the crack in the door, its breath on my cheeks, its blind, white, boiled eyes looking into mine. I jumped back, I tripped and fell on my back. As I scrabbled to get up, the door slowly opened. It was tall and covered in flesh that hung in ribbons. Teeth filled its face, its hair hung long and dirty, and it stunk of old meat. The thing, taller than a man, wheezed as it entered my room. Its long arms dragged on the floorboards. Its dirty nails clattered as it shuffled in. In the half-light from the window, I saw its mouth open and it sniffed for me. Its white eyes were blind. It hunted by scent. The thing that lived in the attic had come down for me. Panic ran through me like electricity, but fear gave me strength and quickness. I jumped and rolled. I went to push past it. It sensed me, turned and grabbed. Its fingers gripped my forearm, cold and greasy. I dragged myself away. I pulled free. The stink of it filled my nostrils like something dead by the roadside. And there was Julie at the door of her room. She stood there fully dressed. I said, "Julie, you must come out. The thing from the attic," she said. She was smiling. It turned in my room, smelling me. It walked slowly towards me down the corridor. I couldn't figure out why she was smiling. "Julie, we've got to get out of here." She grinned and grabbed my arm, holding me tight. I struggled to free myself as a thing from the attic shuffled towards me. Julie's grip held me so I couldn't get away from it. She wanted it to have me. "You've lived longer than most of the men in my life. Time's up now." "Let me go," I begged, but she said, "If you go, what'll my monster eat?" It was close now, only feet away. I recoiled from its stink. The monster raised its long hands with its filthy fingers, its mouth full of teeth, opened, snapping at me. With a burst of terrified strength, I yanked myself from Julie's grasp and ran, almost falling down the stairs. I got to the front door, but it was locked. The thing from the attic descended the stairs after me. Julie stood behind it with the door key. She wagged her finger. "Didn't you think I'd think of that?" And then I remembered the kitchen. I ran as the thing came down the stairs, now within feet. I only hoped Julie had forgotten to lock the kitchen door. I got to it, panicked, going for the handle, finally getting a grip on it, turned the metal handle, hands shaking, and shoved it, half expecting the door to be locked and the thing to catch me. But the door came open, and I emerged onto the balcony. The frigid London air hit me. The Thames was before me. The thing pushed through the door out onto the balcony behind, snapping and snatching. I looked at the river water. There was no contest. I jumped and nearly drowned. I swam and swam, pulled by the river until I came to a shore, 100 yards to the seaward side, carried by the current and frozen by the cold. But I got out of the river dripping wet. I got out, and I never went back to Wapping. I left all my things there and never called to collect them. I count myself lucky. If you ever meet a girl called Julie and get the offer of a house and then she casually mentions a rent that seems too good to be true, walk on by. Well, that was Noises from the Attic, written by me. That's part of my London Horror Stories collection, which you can buy at any good bookstore or online. So I've gone in two ways about this. Sometimes I do a little talk at the end of my stories, as I do about everybody else's, and sometimes I'm a bit shy and I don't. But this seemed to be well received, so I thought what I'd do is I'd say something about this story. So, yes, the Prospect of Whitby. What a wonderful pub it is. Years ago when I was living in London, I didn't go there much because it's quite an awkward place to get to, Wapping. You have to go on the Docklands Light Railway and then walk from Shadwell, I think. But I kind of like it because it's a very atmospheric part of town, very old part of town. And in those days, I actually knew a bloke who lived in this house, except it really wasn't this house. And he was Australian Mike from Melbourne because he was Australian. And he worked for the Australian High Commission. Now, the thing about Australian Mike was he was big pals with Canadian Mike, who worked for the Canadian High Commission. And Canadian Mike used to be a Mountie. Well, I think he still was technically. He was on secondment to London. Anyway, so those were good times. And we used to go and drink in the Prospect of Whitby, and it's a fantastic pub. I've written an article on Medium and in that article, I can't remember what it's about. If you look on Medium and you look for Tony Walker, this is a big task I'm setting you here. You don't have to do that. But the only point is there's some pictures of me and Sheila when we were in the Prospect of Whitby recently, because we went to London in November 2019, which was the last time I've been due to lockdown. And we had a very moody trip along the Thames from Greenwich up to Wapping and got the boats there and had a drink looking out. It's a very wealthy pub now because Wapping has become very gentrified and it's quite close to the financial centres. it was back in the sort of 80s. Think I'm talking about, really showing my age, early 90s, 80s, early 90s. It was a very atmospheric pub. And now it's been kind of, they put in an extension on it, which is great because you have views right by the Thames. But they've done it a very tasteful way, to be fair. But it loses something. So, Australian Mike used to live in this fantastic house upon this. And the idea that it's full of, this is my stepdad's house, the contents, full of 1970s autocar magazines and an old model railway that doesn't work, rooms filled with stuff. So, this is how you write a story. You have images and you juxtapose them, don't you? You get them from your history. So the prospect of Whitby is very real. I did used to go in there. I used to really like it. Interestingly, the last time we were in the prospect of Whitby, the next place we went was actually Whitby. So for a ghost thing, Winter Ghosts, I think it was, the folk horror revival, up there. So I thought that was quite good. We didn't go by sea though, which would have been better, sailing down the Thames from the prospect of Whitby up the east coast to Whitby in Yorkshire. Anyway, so yeah, okay. So that is the setting. The idea of something in the attic. I don't know where that comes from. I guess we've all been in old houses and we've seen the hatch in the ceiling and we thought, oh, what's in there? And it's actually usually Christmas decorations and camping gear and suitcases in our case. But, it's it's more spooky to think there's some kind of monster there. And I guess the backstory, this is the family. It was called a Belphegor I actually named it in an earlier version of the story. So this is some kind of family demon that the dad had, and now Julie, the daughter, has. I guess Julie isn't really based on anybody, although I've known a few Julies. But because I was working in hospitals at that time, so I guess that kind of life of working on wards and doing shifts and coming back at all hours was familiar to me. So that was from that, I suppose. And there is an incident in it. The rugby player guy, I can't remember his name, he got eaten by the Belphegor anyway, the monster. He isn't based on anybody really. He's kind of a stereotype. I think at the time Macedonia had just beaten England at football to some incredulity. The other incident that's drawn from life is when I was a kid. I remember talking to one of my psychiatrist buddies about this, and he says children have false memories. Quite often have false memories. They've mistaken things, dreams or whatever, for memories. But I have a really distinct series of experiences, or memories of experiences over a period whereby I would be, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're just a young boy, 7 years old or something. And I would turn the lights on, and there were various lights. There was a bedside lamp. I'd try that. And in my memory, it wouldn't work. I'd switch it on, but it wouldn't come on. The next step from that would be I'd go to the room light on the wall, click that. Wouldn't come on. Sometimes they did come on when it was normal, but when there was a haunting thing going on, they didn't, and it was a bit scary. So I'd reach out from under my covers, my head under the covers. I'd get the light switch by the bed, flick, didn't work. Oh no. So then I'd get up and go to the room, click, didn't work. And then I'd actually go out and try the landing light. And sometimes that, in my memory, that didn't work. But I do remember flicking on, my dad shouting, what are you doing? Because it'd be about 3 o'clock in the morning. So so that idea of him getting up and then the things in the corridor outside, I suppose that is a 7-year-old me reliving that particular night terror. So there you are. That's a story of, when you write these stories, you sometimes start from a horrible core, something horrible, and you work from there. There wasn't really a twist in this story. It's just like an inexorable, we kind of know what's going to happen to this guy. And he should have just left. He should have stayed in Crouch End with his mate, but he didn't. Anyway, so that is the story of Noises from the Attic. I hope you liked it. If you did, let me know. If you didn't, I'm not really bothered if you let me know. Oh, I shouldn't say that. We should be open to honest criticism, but really people are very keen to give you criticism. And I'm not saying I don't care. Actually, being sincere, some people have given me some really, really good tips, but some people just want to be a critic and just, I don't like it. All right. Yeah. All right. Fine. Okay. Yeah. I don't like, I was going to say anchovies, but I do. I do like anchovies. I don't like sardines because they're too bony. I like the idea of sardines. I don't know why I like the idea of sardines, but I don't like them. So, but there's nothing wrong with sardines. Sardines are absolutely fine fish for many people, probably very good fish. Same with pieces of music, stories. You like some, you don't like others. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Either way, you might like the Moody Blues or you might not. You might like the Eagles or you might not. I'm showing my age here. You might like Kanye West or you might not. And that's okay. Either way. Anyway, peace and love, everybody. Thank you very much. And I will send you more stories soon. Okay, bye.